G'day, gone. Taking a look at some of the weirdest things that you wouldn't see before moving to Australia. This comes to us from a channel called That Johnston Life. It'll be linked in the description down below. Make sure to check them out and check out this whole video, as we won't be seeing the whole thing here. Now, I believe this family moved from the UK to Australia quite a while ago. So that is the perspective presented here. I would like to see any of these that I don't know about already, and of course any of these that maybe I can actually relate to. So I think it will be quite interesting. Let's go ahead and dive right in.
I'm going to cover the weirdest things I ever encountered until I moved to Australia. Now, the first weirdest thing I found was that crimes do happen in Australia. Hang on a minute, that isn't that weird. But the weird thing I did find was that the crimes were reported on the TV, and 9 times out of 10, probably 99 times out of 100, they caught the person that did it. Now, I know what you're thinking, Ross, why is this weird? Well, in the UK where I lived before I moved to Australia, you never really heard about stabbings, shootings, serious violent crime. It very rarely ever made the national news, but you know it did happen. It seems to be that in Australia, serious crimes like this seem to happen so infrequently that the Australian media really catches on to the line, if it bleeds, it leads. I hate to say it, but more often than not in Brisbane, we do hear about crimes that you think, ooh, wish that hadn't happened. But coming from a country that if they followed the same policy on if it bleeds, it leads, that is all that they would be talking about in the news, and they wouldn't have any time to report on anything else.
Now, that is kind of an interesting point. So you have 3 perspectives: the UK perspective, my US perspective, and then of course the Australian perspective that he experiences now. So in Australia, I've heard this before, crime is pretty low. Depends on where you're at, like anywhere. But that kind of stuff is reported, you know, it's kind of a serious incident because it doesn't happen much. And that's a good problem to have, right? You want crimes to be rare. Now, of course, these crimes probably happen more often in the UK, and they're just not reported. So that's kind of interesting to me, because I didn't really know that. That's a lot different than what I would experience here. Here is totally different than both. Here, there seems to be a lot of crime here, of course, depending on where you're at. And it is reported on the news and everything, local news, national news, whatever. So here I'm not really sure how they decide which ones to report on, because there's so much to choose from, I guess. As for the whole catching the person that did it, I'd say it's about 50-50 here. They usually catch a lot of people for some crazy stuff, but sometimes you'll hear about something and you'll hear that someone got away with it and they can't find them. And that's not fun to hear, because it's like, oh, great. Where the hell are they? What are they going to do next?
Glad I'm out of that one. Do your kids know how to swim? And if they do, what age did they learn? Because in Australia, there seems to be a really weird focus on the importance of swimming and teaching young people how to swim.
This came up. This came up very recently on one of my episodes where I dove into kind of random things down under, and this did come up on a forum post. And this makes sense, I guess, even from an outside perspective, just because you associate, you know, massive populations in Australia living by the ocean, right? Living by the coast. And then I think, you know, sports, water sports, you know, pools at homes, easy beach access, beach lifestyle. I think swimming just happens to be much more relevant and much, you know, bigger of a deal than other places. There's just some places where water is life and some places where it's not, right? And so, yeah, this one makes sense. And I think it's cool because it's a good, like, skill. It's a good life lesson, like knowing how to swim and kind of deal with water. So, yeah, good on Australia for that one. Here in the US, it's more split. Of course, if you live somewhere with water culture, if you live California coast or Florida, like, you're going to be into water, right? It's going to be very relevant. But if you live in the middle of North Dakota, you know, maybe not, right?
It's weird. It's not really weird, but it's a good kind of weird. Especially in a country where it seems like it's more common to have a swimming pool than central heating, and enough beaches in a country that if you wanted to visit a new one every day, it would probably take up a third of your lifetime.
Y'all have the most beaches, like, ever. It kind of makes your head spin. Thousands and thousands of them in Australia, which is so cool. And then how common are pools, right? I always think of pools as just like a very expensive item in expensive homes. So even if you find like a really rich neighborhood here in the US, you know, it's all depends on taste and what people can afford, of course. But I feel like even in an expensive neighborhood, only maybe 10 or 20% of the homes are going to have pools. I wonder if pools are that much more common in Australia, or if it's just maybe people overblowing that kind of perspective.
Focus on teaching young people to swim seems to be so important. If anything, the weird thing is knowing people who don't know how to swim. And more often than not, they seem to be foreigners. I hear Bondi Rescue seems to find a load of them. Why would you go?
Yeah, that place highlights non-swimmers. And what do you know? 9 times out of 10, they are definitely tourists or foreigners.
This one definitely confused me the first time I heard it. But why do so many Australians say but at the end of a sentence? Now, even before I moved to Australia, I was pretty common with the fact that Australians seem to rise up at the end of every sentence, like they're commonly asking a question.
That's noticeable.
But why would you say but at the end? Want to go down the tab tonight, but?
Have I not noticed that before?
But what? Is this just a common Queensland thing? Does it depend on how bogan you are or how ochre you talk? How Australian do you have to be to but at the end of your sentence?
Now, I'm sure this is going to be some sort of regional thing or maybe generational thing. Like, I believe him. I'm sure. I'm trying to think of like different Australian clips and Australian sentences and dialogues I've heard. I guess that never stood out to me. I'm sure I've heard it, but I don't remember that sticking out to me that they say but at the end of sentences. You have to tell me if that's something you notice. Interesting.
Now, I myself, I really try to be as Australian as possible and to integrate into my new loving country. But I just can't seem to but at the end of the sentence. But yeah, now it just seems so natural. But yeah, I can't do it. I'm just gonna.
Yeah, there'd have to be a way it'd have to come naturally almost. Otherwise, that'd be a hard thing to force.
Seem to be so strict on is immigration policies. And coming from the UK, where it seemed like every person used to moan about migrants, I mean, that doesn't necessarily change so much in Australia. They seem to be moaning about me even more, driving up them house prices. But as a UK citizen, I used to overlook the fact of how easy it was to move pretty freely around different countries in the world. But you want to come and live in Australia? Yeah, nah, it's not so easy. For a lot of people coming to stay for a few days, a few months, that's not necessarily the problem. But you want to live and work here? Well, what country do you come from for a start? What can you do that can better the Australian way of life? Because if you can't contribute to this country, chances are you're probably not going to be let in, at least permanently. Australia is one of the hardest countries to settle and live in long term, but it's also one of the most desirable. Over the last 3 years of running this channel, I've been able to help hundreds, if not thousands of people in their journey to make the move to Australia.
That's pretty cool. That's what I've heard. Definitely one of the most desirable. You know, people do want to move there, I'm sure, from every corner of the earth. When they hear about it, they study it, they fall in love with Australia. I totally get it. I can relate. It's interesting because I feel like it's the opposite here in the US, and everyone has their views on it. Everyone has their opinion on how it should work. And every country clearly has their own way of doing it as well. Here in the US, it seems to be that, you know, people do just kind of flood in here over time, right? I mean, the population growth in the U.S. over decades has been crazy. So, I mean, you know, it seems like we're not nearly as strict as Australia is, just looking at the differences in, you know, numbers. But I respect the Australian way because I think that's technically how immigration should work. You know, hopefully that's not controversial to say. Like, I feel like it should be, you know, there should be some definite processes to it. Should be somewhat strict. You know, what do you have to offer? Why do you want to be here? What are you going to contribute to make the country better? You know, I think that should be standard for anything, right? That's kind of standard for like getting a job at a big company, you know, getting into a country. I just feel like that's logical. Yeah, Australia definitely seems to keep on that. Obviously, people do go there and immigrate there. It's just in, you know, a lot smaller scale than what I'm used to seeing here in the US.
I know this is going to seem like first world problem, but one of the biggest problems seemed to be that when you went out for a coffee, where would you go? Which chain establishment would you love to deposit your money to in exchange for a cup of brown, sometimes hot, sometimes tasteless coffee? Buying a coffee in the UK sometimes felt a little bit like a lottery. Where are you going to get a good one? Is the
Wow, that sounds...
Coffee place that you finally found that does serve a half decent coffee, overflowing with patrons so that you can't actually get a coffee.
Wow, that sounds relatable to the US. I've had some really, really phenomenal coffee here, but it's rare. So it's like for every good coffee that I've had in the US, it seems like dozens and dozens that are just subpar or gross. Right? So, you end up having to just kind of source your own and make your coffee at home. I feel like that's your best bet here. But, sometimes you can find some cool local places. But it does seem kind of annoying. Like we have all these coffee chains, and they're just almost all of them, not all of them, but almost all of them are just, they're not good, and they're overpriced. So it's like, who on earth goes here? People that are obsessed with Starbucks and stuff and Dunkin' here in the US, like, hey, you do you. I really, truly don't understand it. And I know Australians watching this don't understand it either.
In the next 30 minutes at least. Australia seems to be full of good coffee shops. Wherever you turn, even if you go to Macca's, even if you go to 7-Eleven, you can seem to get a half decent coffee almost anywhere. Having the trust that you can get a decent cup of coffee just doesn't seem to fill you with anxiety whenever you...
Never take that for granted. I know you guys don't. I know you guys take pride in your coffee, and you know how lucky you are with coffee culture. That is such a cool thing. You guys have some of the best coffee culture in the world, and that you can pretty reliably find good quality, accessible coffee. Damn, I'm jealous.
What kind of music do you listen to? Now, from myself, if I did claim what kind of taste of music I had, I'd probably say it's pretty eclectic, meaning that I enjoy most different types of music.
Yeah,
there was one type of music that I didn't really experience, and it felt a bit weird in Australia that it seemed so popular. I just often thought that country music was like Taylor Swift, and it turns out that in Australia, like most places of the world, Taylor Swift is also really popular. Like, that's not a problem. But I had never really been one to listen to country music. It just wasn't really a thing in the UK. I mean, you could get it on Spotify, but it wasn't really widely played on the radio. Here you've got country music festivals, country music artists playing big venues. I even have friends that pretty much all they'll listen to is country music. And no, I don't sit there wondering why we're...
So that's pretty cool. There's a lot of things I still learned about Australia that I haven't heard before, and that's one of them. I knew you guys had country music probably more than other countries. So more similar to us in the US in that sense. So I already knew that, but hearing that you have the full on like festivals that's on the radio, people listen to it, people are into it. Yeah, that is pretty cool. And that's something relatable, because I feel like a lot of countries I might look at on this channel, that's not the case, right? Now, I don't know, but I'm going to assume that's not the case. And, quite a few countries I could look at on the map. But the US and Australia, I think we kind of got that locked in together. Country music's awesome, and country music festivals, lifestyle, it's fun. And now I do listen to a lot of different things, but who doesn't love a good old country song? Or going for a drive at sunset, listening to country music, being with your loved one or your family. Come on, that is a great time. Can't argue with that.
Friends, we have lots of other things in common. Do I now love country music? I mean, I wouldn't say that I'm completely converted, that I'm going to listen to it exclusively, but like the fact that you're also going to hear some weird older classics in Australia. Every now and again, they're going to drop a country banger on you as well. And you know what? You're probably going to like it.
Hell yeah.
Especially if it's in exchange for UK drill music. What the f***ing hell is that? Now in Australia,
I don't know what that is.
Tell you about the weird taste buds that they have. And no, this isn't anything to do with Vegemite, which is lovely, by the way. But coming from Europe, where they do often claim to have the best dips for chips and hot chips, I call them hot chips now. But what do you dip your hot chips in? And I am also not talking about chicken salt, which is also lovely, by the way. But how much of an abomination is taking sour cream and mixing it with sweet chili sauce? Now, I don't mean fully mixing them together, but I guess if you did that, it wouldn't be that much of a bad thing. But getting sour cream, topping it with sweet chili sauce, and then dipping your hot chips into them, or dipping your potato wedges in them.
What? Sweet chili sauce and sour cream? And it's literally, he's right, they don't mix it. They just do half and half. But this one I'm sure I've heard of. For some reason, if it has a name, it's escaping me. But it's definitely not something I've thought of to try much. I'm thinking I need to restart some of these food videos. We need to whip up some of these in the kitchen and try and recreate this. This would be interesting. I'll tell you what, I have my fries with ranch. If you didn't know that already, hell yes. Ranch right here. And you dip the fries in there. Now that is some good shit. People are probably laughing at me right now. That's fine. If you don't get it, you don't get it. That's all right. I will eat enough ranch for the two of us. Fries and ranch are the best. I don't eat ketchup with fries like a lot of, at least Americans do. Fries and ranch is where it's at. I'm not even sure if ranch is like very common at all in Australia or like other countries. But here you can get it anywhere and any restaurant, and it's just so good. I also like loaded fries. Now loaded fries can come, a million different ways. So I typically like a lot of different styles of loaded fries. So knowing that, I feel like I would probably like this, or at least I'd be willing to try it because, that kind of falls into that broadening horizons with fries and what to dip them in.
And that's a fantastic
Yeah, I'm interested
combo.
in this.
Can you imagine hot chips, chicken salt, sour cream and sweet chili sauce, washed all down with a pint of Vegemite? I mean, okay, you're not going to do the last one.
Yeah,
but if you've never had the sweet chili and sour cream combo, did you ever wonder why there seemed to be a little bit of a hole in your heart? Then that's probably the next thing you need to try to...
I agree. How did Australians come up with that? That's one that you don't see here in the US. Okay. You sold me. I'm going to try it. I'm going to cut it there. There is quite a few examples that weren't even featured here, so use the link down in the description. Check that whole video out if you want to check those out and see what we missed. That was a good one. That was interesting. I at this point, I've looked at so much stuff from certain countries like Australia. I am delighted when I can actually see and hear about some things I haven't really learned about. Or that are totally new to me, and that happened with a couple things here, and I'm pretty stoked, actually, pretty excited for that. As always, these will be great. This is a great video for comments, so please comment away. What was right? What was wrong? Anything to add? I'm all ears. Let me know. Hope you all had a great weekend, and your week is off to a great start. Hope you all have been feeling great. I have not been feeling great, but I'm finally getting better, so we're back at it. And I really do appreciate you watching. It's going to do it for this one. My name is Ian. You're watching IWrocker. Until next time, y'all. Catch you later.